Oh. You all have broken the mic. They dropped the mic.
Sergeant clearly doesn't trust me around the sensitive.
Exactly. Come up here. Right.
So we asked counties to, we had 7 counties look at cases. We looked at 140 cases to pull what OCAT found, what kind of referrals were made. And it really, it bears out the notion that more is being prompted. We had, in this sample, about 52% of the folks reported a mental health, substance use disorder, or DV, sex trafficking issue. About half of those people declined services, either because it was something that was in the past or something that they felt like they were being helped with, or they weren't, you know, in a place where they felt like it needed to be addressed. 20% entered employment, 20% entered education, 20% went to stabilization, 20% were exempted. What the counties report to us is that we know a lot more about a family after going through the process. The question for the counties, and I think for our state partner and for the legislature, is how does the case management model for CalWORKs evolve in light of the use of OCAT?
And what additional resources does that then signal to me as a legislator that we need to bring to bear to meet this new identified need?
And I think, I mean, I said this last year in hearings, from the county standpoint, stabilization, housing support program, OCAT, subsidized employment, they're absolutely the right components. The question is weaving them together and making sure there's sort of a robust assessment and case management process. We built a theory of practice in 1998 for CalWORKs because that's what we knew at the time. And we're at the point of doing the same thing now for what we're calling CalWORKs 2.0. And to that end, the counties have contributed some of their welfare to work dollars to a statewide contract with Mathematica Policy Research, one of the most respected research and practice organizations, to help us do just that. Identify what are the training needs, what are the core competencies around doing assessments and doing case management in the post SB 1014 world, 1041 world. How do you weave subsidized employment and stabilization together? And so I think we're at the sort of the early stages, I think, of putting together a more robust program based on what we've learned, good and bad, in the first almost 20 years of the program. And I just wanted to let the legislature know from our standpoint, that's very much a work in progress, but it's very much a sort of an effort that we want to do in collaboration with the state and the legislature as we learn more. Because I think OCAT is a linchpin, but the question is, as you appropriately identify, what do we do with the information? Right.
Because from our perspective, as we have conversations in the context of the budget and bills on the floor, I am clear that we are constantly and have a responsibility to paint a current, accurate, relevant picture of the CalWORKs recipient. And when there's data like here that I then can't connect to, and as a result of this identified need, this is what we should do, I feel like this start and stop kind of motion from our perspective, given the role we play. So that's why I was really trying to understand this recommendation versus referral, because I was immediately looking to connect the dot to make sure that people were receiving services and that they were available. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Committee members, Mike Carroll again with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. We actually concur with much of what Mr. Mecca just said. OCAT is a revolution for CalWORKs, and it has to be seen that way. We frankly were one of the proponents of it. We think it's an amazing tool. It is giving us insights into the lives of our families that we've simply never known. And so we think it's completely appropriate that the legislature should and must revisit the decisions that we've made to make sure that how we're running our welfare to work program is consistent with what we now know about families.
Their needs.
Because when you put together all this data that you're hearing about, the high numbers of people using the the housing support program, we had 46,000 applications for homeless assistance in a 12-month period recently. We're seeing very large numbers come out of OCAT. And again, families, it's absolutely right. Some families won't take advantage of the services, aren't ready for that. But we do have to monitor this very closely. But here's the thing that I guess from the perspective of the clients that's really important to mention. While the counties and the state and even us as advocates are learning how to use these tools, time clocks are running.
Right.
And the lessons that we're learning are invaluable for us as policymakers, but sometimes they're getting to the folks on the ground a little too late. And so we think, for example, if families are going into family stabilization, right now we stop the 24-month welfare to work clock, but we don't stop the 48-month time clock. That keeps running. That was a decision that we made 2 or 3 years ago. And I think as we see this rich array of data that's coming forth, this is one of those places that we may want to revisit. Because is it really fair if we see a family that's been humanly trafficked or in sexual exploitation? I can't imagine the situation in which we would not be getting them in family stabilization or having a darn close look at what's going on there. And to think that they should have their clocks running while they're in that just doesn't seem right. So that would be our broader comment about this.
Any response to that last point either of you would like to make in terms of the 48-month clock? And
I mean, the family stabilization, essentially, when we enacted that, the clock stopper there is good cause. And essentially, good cause, we essentially incorporated the way the law worked prior to that. We were basically saying good cause applies here. Good cause was not a clock stopper historically for the 48-month clock, or before that, the 60-month clock.
And that's something that we should consider. Thank you for raising that. Thank you. Let's make note of that to follow up. Are you coming up to testify? Are you holding up the wall?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the invitation. I just want to highlight the point that anytime a woman or man, a person, discloses sexual abuse or trafficking, and we have 17,000 people now doing it with a prompt, it requires a lot of bravery. It is maybe the one point in time in which they will accept help. I do think that this is, that pivoting off of this new data, this new information that we have, to build something into CalWORKS to directly and immediately respond to that disclosure of rape, abuse, trafficking, with a program that's appropriate, would be a respectful response of all you've done to make sure that this tool is reflective of the experience of low-income women coming into the program. The only time that I'm aware of where there is a mandate related to rape in the CalWORKS program is in the Maximum Family Grant. What we do there is we give one exception to that rule, which denies basic needs assistance to the children born into a CalWORKS home, if the mother can prove that she reported a rape within 12 months of the rape and brings the materials to the office to show that. And then we accept the child from the MFG rule. Right now, that's the Department of Social Services, the Welfare and Institutions Code, rape disclosure policy. That's the only one on the books. But now with this new data, I hope that the legislature, that the Senate, the budget can begin this conversation of what is the appropriate response, and it should be immediate.
And my assumption is we don't know that those things that you're suggesting aren't happening based on this data. All we know is that recommendations under this very broad, very diverse area, DV, rape, sexual exploitation, but we don't know, and I'm assuming the folks are mandated reporters, even though it has to do with minors, but we don't know that that's not happening, correct? that if I come in and in my OCAT, I disclose that I am a victim, I'm assuming that workers are then taking appropriate action under the law, just following logic.
Certainly, the workers are all mandated reporters.
Right.
So if it is if it falls within abuse of a minor, then that is a legal obligation. I think, however, Ms. Bartolo raises a legitimate question as to should we have very specific guidance as to, in the event that there's disclosure of sexual violence that is within any sort of contemporaneous period, that there be some sort of standardized system of referral for survivor services, recovery services, and to law enforcement for reporting purposes. And I think it's an absolutely legitimate issue, and I think that's exactly what OCAT starts to give us this sort of the window into circumstances where, as we become more and more knowledgeable about circumstances, we can non-intrusively and not in a sort of an overbearing sort of manner, but make sure that the resources that the public, the nonprofit sector have available are made known. Right.
Eye towards an election. Now that we have out here in front of God and everybody that 17,000 people have communicated something around these areas, that there needs to be some kind of autopilot kind of process where, as that data becomes apparent, that those tweaks happen.
I remember Yuri Bronfenbrenner once saying, the great tragedy isn't what we don't know, it's what we don't do with what we do know.
Hello,
And
exactly.
As this information becomes available, I mean, and I really would sort of, echo Mr. Mecca's point, that the counties have, I think, very, very responsibly and proactively and energetically stepping forward and saying, how do we build systems that really move across, boundaries? To some extent, I've argued often, the best child abuse prevention system is robust services in the public assistance systems.
Right.
Because that is when information starts to become available
Right.
about the most vulnerable people.
Stressors are identified.
Stresses are identified. And
I agree.
it's not that that's the only place where children are at risk of maltreatment, but to the extent that it makes information available to us, then we need to have protocols that act on it.
I would agree. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll move on to issue number 5, correct?
I see some family stabilization
Okay,
questions.
so let me figure out what I'm doing wrong in terms of,
I study the.
all of that is a part of early engagement services. Got it. These are all subs. Okay.
all.
Got you. So family stabilization, we're on the bottom of page 20 of the agenda.
Yeah, the vision of family stabilization was
Got it.
to, again, going back to the CalWorks, for those that are able-bodied and can take advantage of the program, it's how to get them ready so they can succeed. They're clients that aren't otherwise perhaps either through OCAT or other processes exempt, so we think they can participate, but they're not ready to participate. Maybe they're not ready because of a crisis having to do with housing, maybe a crisis having to do with mental health or substance abuse. The vision of family stabilization was solve that crisis so then that they're set up to succeed in the regular program after they finish with family stabilization. The focus in family stabilization is on intensive case management and referrals to necessary services. Another element of family stabilization is the new parlance of 2-generation. We serve the entire family. We could be dealing with mental health or school issues or issues around the children as well. And essentially the program addresses issues around homelessness, domestic abuse, mental health or substance abuse. The handout that I had on page 11 does give a few highlights. The program is ramping up. As of December 2015, the cases being served, 2,400, both adults and children. The next line has the total being served, so the 2,900 is greater than the 24 because there may be children and adults. 35% of the individuals are receiving services. And some things that we've been doing, mattresses, car seats, clothing are some of the things that counties have been doing as part of this. Again, the vision is to provide that pathway to being able to succeed in the welfare to work program by alleviating that crisis with intensive case management. I think there was a question about, the question is, do we expect it to increase? The answer is yes, we do. The trends are upward, and we will, which is a good thing. In terms of patterns, I would say it's very individualized. We're not really seeing at this point patterns in counties that cause us to rethink anything. We're continuing to look at that. I would say family stabilization is a key element of the program, and I would hope we would be having more referrals into it, not less.
Finance or LAO? Any comments on family stabilization? Senator Monning, any public comment on family stabilization? Thank you. Seeing none. Now we'll go into issue 5. I've been trying to get there, apparently. Trailer bill language, 615, approved relative caregiver child support pass-through.
This is, we view this as largely technical cleanup to allow essentially the child support disregard, allow a bunch of rules that applied to children that were in the, essentially they were TANF children or CalWORKS children, and now they're moving into the approved relative caregiver program where they get a higher grant. But things such as the $50 pass-through of child support, if there was, we wanted them to get that along with other services.
Okay.
We tended to believe that, let me put it this way. We've interpreted current law the way we're asking you to amend it. We really just want to line up the law with actually how the program is working today. But in fairness, our Department of Child Support Services thought it could be clearer. We agreed with them. We put this proposal forward. But the way I would summarize it is it's really just aligning with the way we're operating the program today.
Any comment from LAO or Finance? Senator Monning, any questions? Any public comment? See none, we'll hold the item open.
Trailer bill issue 6, county sharing ratio. This is actually similar. It's a fiscal issue, but essentially we are once again asking to have the law align with how we actually are budgeting at the 2.5% share.
Any comment, any public comment? LA or Finance? We'll hold the item open. Issue 7.
This is the elimination of the TAP program. Back in 2006, as the legislature was looking at the then Deficit Reduction Act, TAP was potentially a strategy for dealing with work participation in something we talked about earlier, in a move-out way. It was never implemented and has been delayed for many years by the legislature. We think this is the time to repeal it with the success of essentially the move-out program that we have been able to implement administratively, the move-out of the long-term sanction and the safety net into MOE funds, and that and all the good work of the counties and the clients to achieve the work participation rate. We have achieved the goal of what TAP would have done by different means, and TAP is obsolete and should be repealed.
Any comments? Public? We'll hold this item open. We'll move now into issue 8, which includes our proposals for investment, beginning on page 26 of the agenda. These are proposals that we received from advocates and others. Again, they're outlined on page 26 of the agenda.
Yeah. No, happy to.
We have several folks who have agreed to serve on a panel. You can come use the full. Mr. Bland, can we close the laptop now and move that out of the way? Does it make it easier for you? You're welcome. You feel free to utilize these chairs around here. Other folks who will be. Do we have a list of? LAO, who's going to give us an overview. Then we're going to hear from the following advocates on three proposals for investment. Maximum family grant rule, we'll hear from Myra Duran from Latinas for Reproductive Justice. On the issue of increasing grant levels, we'll hear from Mr. Harrell from the Western Center. And on the housing support program, we'll hear from Mr. Mecca from CWDA and Chris Tunstall, who was a CalWorks client. Did I refer everyone who's here? Refer to? Perfect. Let's get started with the LAO and the document that you've prepared for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan Woolsey with the Legislative Analyst's Office. As you mentioned, I'll be speaking from a handout that's been distributed to you. I was asked by the committee to present a little bit of background on the CalWorks grant and how it relates to poverty measures and what are some recent changes to the grant. A lot of what I'll cover has been touched on in one form or another already in various presentations, so I will be brief, but if you'd like to follow along, I'll start with just some high-level background on page 2 of the handout. Families in the CalWorks program receive cash assistance that's intended to help them meet their basic needs, and these grants vary by family size and also by earnings, as Mr. Bland mentioned earlier. As was mentioned, because a portion of earnings are disregarded when the grant is calculated, a family with no earnings receives the maximum grant, but that maximum grant is actually the minimum amount of resources that a family would have, because as earnings go up, the amount of additional earnings is less than the reduction in the grant that they have. And then finally, families in CalWorks generally also receive CalFresh food assistance, which, as was mentioned, unlike some assistance programs like earned income tax credit, is available regardless of income, and families that have no earnings do have access typically to this program. On page 3, we display the maximum grant that can be received by a family of 3 in a high-cost county. So this would be the grant that's received by families with no earnings, relative to the federal poverty level that applies to families of that size, going all the way back to 1998 when the CalWorks program was implemented. As you can see in the figure, CalWorks grants initially tracked with increases in the FPL. The FPL goes up every year to reflect changes in inflation, cost of living, and over a period of several years up to the mid-2000s, the CalWorks maximum grant was typically above 50% of the FPL. And that's consistent with prior law that provided an annual cost of living adjustment to the CalWorks grant. Later on, beginning in the mid-2000s, the annual COLA for the CalWorks grant was frequently suspended by the legislature, and later on during the recession, the maximum grant was reduced. It was later partially restored, which we'll talk about a little bit more in more detail in just a moment, but they remain below the levels that they were at before the recession. And in 2016-17, under the governor's proposal, which has grants remaining flat at the level they're at currently, the grant is roughly 42% of the FPL in 2016.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we permanently removed the COLA.
That's correct. That was
What
in
year was that?
2009.
Yes, thank you.
Just as a side note, we mentioned that CalFresh is available to CalWorks families. If you add the maximum CalWorks grant to the CalFresh benefit, that came to 74% of FPL in 1997 and 71% in 2016. So you can see that's a smaller amount of erosion, and that's just because the CalFresh benefit, federally funded, does receive an annual COLA. So that makes up for some of the erosion in the CalWorks grant. On page 5, we touch on the supplemental poverty measure, which was also mentioned before. So I'll be brief on this. The numbers we're presenting here are most similar to the leftmost bar that was in the department's chart. This is for families with no earnings. One interesting nuance about the SPM is that there's not one threshold for the entire state. In fact, there are different thresholds for different regions, and they vary by cost of living. So if you look at just the CalWORKS grant by itself, that maximum grant for a family of 3, it's between 31 and 37% of the SPM threshold, looking at high and low cost counties. If you add in the CalFresh, which again is the main benefit that's available if you have no earnings, in addition to CalWORKS, it's between 53 and 65.
More appropriate methodology?
The SPM does provide a much more comprehensive look, and there are some advantages, some advances that were made in the way that it's determined. It's probably best to think of the FPL and SPM as complements to each other. They have strengths and weaknesses. One of the main weaknesses of the SPM is that it's only been around since 2011, so we're not able to do this long-term analysis like we can with the FPL. And additionally, it's tied more to standard of living than the FPL is, and so looking at changes in poverty over time, it can be difficult with the SPM to sort out whether that's because everyone else is doing better or if it's because those in poverty are doing worse. Finally, on page, what page is this? Covered up the number 6, on page 6. Just to restate the recent changes that were made. In 2009, grants were reduced by 4% and the statutory COLA was eliminated. In 2010, grants were further reduced by 8%. Since that time, grants have been increased by 5% in March 2014 and an additional 5% in April 2015. You can see in the chart that is a nominal change of about $19 below where we were before the recession. After you take into account changes in cost of living, it's an erosion of the value of the grant of about $114.
We should have never referred to the 5% as an increase. It should have been referred to as like a reinstatement or something, just to be clear. Exactly.
I'll close by just noting that while we do not have a statutory COLA in effect now, the legislature did dedicate a portion of growth in certain realignment revenues to provide grant increases. The way this works is that in years when there's enough funds available after the previous increases, including both of the 5%, if there's anything left over, that can be used to then further increase grants. For this year, Department of Finance estimates, which we find to be reasonable, show that the available funds will not quite cover the cost of the previous increases, which means that no grant would be provided automatically this October. However, it's likely that there will be more funds available in the next year, and the legislature, of course, has the authority to use its discretion to increase grants as it sees fit. And with that, I will take any questions that you have.
Ramani?